This is the SpaceX Starship. It's big, it's powerful, and it's the first rocket ever built that has a genuine shot at sending people from Earth to the planet Mars. But even for all its impressive size and capability, the Starship is far from a luxury cruise liner to the stars. The journey will be long, dangerous, uncomfortable, and kinda gross. The experience will push our interplanetary travelers to the limit. So if the Starship is going to carry people to Mars, then what is that actually going to look like? The initial promise of the Starship was that the entire upper half of this 50-meter tall rocket would be wide open for both crew and cargo. About 1,000 cubic meters of sweeping, open-concept deck and humongous windows, all very luxurious. Then SpaceX started test flying Starship prototypes and trying to land them, which did not start off very well. There was a long period of trial and error and crashing and exploding. One of the biggest changes made to Starship during this era was the relocation of the secondary fuel tanks for the landing burn. They moved up from the bottom of the rocket and into the nose cone. If you look at that flip maneuver that the ship performs as it comes in for a landing, the bottom of the rocket swings around like a pendulum. You don't want your fuel down there, you want it up in the top where the ship remains relatively stable. The change worked great, but it does mean that the entire pointy bit is now off limits for the crew, so no more big window. Then SpaceX started flying the Starship all the way to space and coming back down again, which led to another big change in design. They had to make the rocket bigger. In 2025, SpaceX began flying the Starship V2. This is a little tricky because while it's bigger on the outside by about 2 meters, the new Starship is actually smaller on the inside, with about the same amount of height removed from the payload bay. What they did was actually extend the fuel tanks upward into the cargo area. This gives the Starship more propellant to work with, which is going to allow the ship to actually carry itself and a payload of 100 metric tons all the way to Earth orbit. So if we were traveling to Mars inside the Starship as we know it today, we'd have about 500 cubic meters of livable space. Now, that's half of the original concept, but it's not small either. The International Space Station offers about 900 cubic meters of internal volume spread out over a claustrophobic maze of narrow passageways. And the station is permanently inhabited by a crew of 7 people. It's even held up to 13 at one time. So, how many people could we reasonably fit into a Starship V2 for the round trip to Mars and back again? That is not personal space, that's just 25 cubic meters of general space per person, about the same volume as a shipping container. So according to that research, our Starship V2 could support up to 20 people maximum without significant risk of anyone going insane. But we also need to consider that crew space is not the same as cargo space. A Starship built for people is going to require floors, walls, and a center column with a ladder to move up and down. Then the entire lower level of our Starship habitat is going to be dedicated to an airlock and cargo bay because at some point, hopefully, we will land on Mars and head down to the surface. So with all of that considered, our 500 cubic meters is quickly shrinking into a claustrophobic nightmare. Now, you might be able to make it work with a crew of 6, but that's not how we're going to colonize Mars. And this is where Starship V3 comes in, the long Starship, taking it up to 69 meters tall. Starship V3 adds about 17 meters in length over V2, but that's also going to add a lot of weight. So the bigger rocket will need bigger fuel tanks, meaning we don't actually get all of that extra length back for habitable space. But what we do end up with is probably something a lot closer to that original Starship concept with about 1,000 cubic meters of internal volume. So SpaceX still got us there, it just required a bit of compromise along the way. See, we can be realistic and optimistic at the same time. It is possible. Now that we finally know where we're living on our Mars trip, let's start building out our interior. Starting from the bottom, we know that there needs to be a cargo bay and airlock down there. and we can actually get a pretty good idea of what this is going to look like by referencing the design that SpaceX has already developed for the Artemis moon landing, which will use a modified Starship, probably based on the V2. The lower level is going to have a circular airlock that astronauts will enter from above. Inside that circle is where the EVA suits are kept. Once suited up, we can move into the unpressurized cargo hold. This is where exploration equipment is going to be stored. Mobility devices, scientific instruments, cameras, tools for collecting samples, all of that fun stuff. There's also the elevator. It's going to be a very long way down to the surface, so we've also had a quick glimpse at what SpaceX has in mind for the crew lift. It's kind of halfway between an old service elevator and a shark cage. Nothing fancy, which is good because we don't want this thing to break. Okay, so that's level 1. Let's move up into level 2. This would make the most sense as our first pressurized storage space, remembering that this ship needs to land on Mars, so we want to keep the center of gravity as low as possible, meaning heavy stuff on the bottom. So that's why our water system, our oxygen, and HVAC, our food, and our waste storage all goes on level 2. Moving up again to deck 3, it would make the most sense to keep the hygiene, washing, and toilet as close to the storage deck as possible. That keeps our plumbing to a minimum.